Hey guys, welcome to Girl Meets Screen. My name's Norma, your host or whatever. And as you can see today, we are talking the M&H, Meghan has, Prince has, whatever you want to call it, the limited series. Let's just jump right in because we got some thoughts and we want to share them. So in episode 1, we basically get like Harry's childhood and life up until meeting Meghan. And obviously we have Harry, we have Prince Harry, we have Prince William. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that, Prince William was the kid that was more like, this is just how we were raised. This is just how it goes for us. This is our family. These are the things we have to do. These are the type of people we have to be. Like, he kind of just like, is it assimilated? Like, just, followed the path. Whereas you have Harry, who kind of could see like why it wasn't great, if that makes sense. And I think it was clear that Harry was a mama's boy. William probably was more of a daddy's boy. But you could see that Harry saw the world through his mother's eyes, like the way his mother viewed it. So he saw, the negative impacts of like the paparazzi always being there, the responsibilities of the family. As he got older, like all he wanted was normal, and far from it for him, right? So you can definitely see that right away. I felt like right in that first episode, I could see, like, I wrote down right away, like, he relates more to his mom. And was just more in tune with her. So you could see that he could see like her pain. He could see the things she was dealing with. He automatically has a more sympathetic view to his mom. Like, there was that interview she did. I forget who he said it was with. But he automatically mentions, like, we now know she was manipulated into that interview and kind of revealed things in ways that people wouldn't and things like that. Not to get too much into his mom, since this is about him and Meg, but it really was like history repeating itself with Meghan, because, his mom, I mean, I've like read and heard a lot about how they kind of wanted to make his mom look crazy. They wanted to make her look like paranoid and just nuts and just like completely out of it, when like she was having logical responses to things, like Prince Charles or whatever is now with his mistress, who she, like was vocal about. She was vocal about other women. And she was very vocal about like what she didn't like about, the monarchy or whatever, or being royalty. Not always direct, but like she was open, like she divorced, like she separated from him. Like, those are things I feel like, people in the monarchy don't do. I don't even know if I'm referring into it right by saying the monarchy, but that's like the only word I can think of to describe when I'm talking about like the elements and not like the people. Like what it means to be royal, the rules they have to follow, things like that. I'm just calling it the monarchy. Sorry if it's wrong, don't beat me up. We get an insight into his life growing up with the paparazzi, how he learns as an adult, kind of like the way the family deals with it is it's almost like you make deals with them. Like, listen, these are the shots you can get, then you have to leave us alone. Or like, this is the information we'll give as long as you keep this information hidden, type of thing. And so he kind of caught on to how that worked early on. And then we have Harry as like a teenager and a young adult getting into trouble, which I don't know that I necessarily say trouble. It sounds more of like, again, him like really trying to get that normal, so yeah, I could definitely see why he was struggling. But he gets it together. He goes to the army, or whatever the British version of the army is. I don't know. The British Army. Serves for, I think he said he was in it for 10 years, 6 years. It was either 6 or 10. He's in the army, then he goes to Botswana a lot. So episode 2, we have kind of the same thing, but Meghan's life. So we hear basically about her childhood and how she didn't really experience like racism or any prejudices because of her skin. Probably like the areas she lived in, they were probably just accepting of her, and she never really had to deal with like, any struggles race related. Because her mom talks about how when everything, because in this episode they also speak to the relationship being revealed, and like how things shifted after that. And so her mom, says how she tells her like this is gonna turn into a race thing, and she's like, Mom, I don't want to hear that. Like kind of that very like not my experience type of energy when it's like, but it is. So yeah, so she starts to experience this for the first time. Her mom talks about, well, they both talk about, the media twisting things, saying she's from Compton when she's not. Her mom talks about how they would like film Skid Row and talk about how they used to live there and things like that. And just like really upplaying, this Black family struggle type of thing. So once their relationship gets discovered, things get really hard and really tricky and ugly, especially for Meghan. And so she talks a little about how her families and friends, people who love her, were kind of like, is he worth this? Like, are you sure? And kind of just the struggles they were dealing with that, and how they, just really leaned on each other and really like depended on each other for support, and like nourishing their relationship. She had a 2-week rule. They had to see each other every 2 weeks somehow. Like they had to find a way. And so that's how she would visit him more, because it was easier for her to go over there with the whole like hidden thing. But yeah, so they get discovered, and that's kind of how they kept their relationship going in a positive direction. So in this episode, they kind of end it with their engagement. November 2017, I think, was when they were engaged. So we move on to episode 3, which is like the wedding planning, the announcement of the engagement, like what that meant for everyone. In this episode, we get England's like history with like racism, essentially. History was, for whatever reason, was also just a subject I wasn't interested in. I think just where I was, it wasn't taught in an interesting way. But anyways, yeah, so we get a little bit of their history, which honestly I had no idea about. I'm sure a lot of people did, but very informational. But I think it was like the first slave trade ship was like funded by Queen Elizabeth, and then a bunch more after that were funded by like the monarchy or Queen Elizabeth and the royals, whatever you want to call it. Basically like they're very embedded in that history, and they like to just kind of like, yeah, but anyways, like that happened, but look at all these great things, And so there's almost like this fake wokeness that isn't actually there. We get a little bit of Harry, people and Harry talking about his unlearning of racism, him learning of the big mistakes he made. He dressed like a Nazi for a Halloween, I believe. He kind of talks about how like he instantly regretted that. But he was, I think, 20. And when you think about that in terms of like how sheltered in the sense of like he grew, like he grew up so immersed in that life that it's like there was no putting him in any other environment, because that's not what the monarchy is about, So I kind of get it. 20 is still young. You're still a kid. As much as you might think you're an adult, you're still very much a child. So it's still a place where, and especially someone like him, at that age, you're still being sheltered in that sense of like you're not allowed to, like mingle with these people or places or things, And then this episode, we also have Meghan kind of losing her relationship with her dad. He basically was like selling photos to the tabloid, nothing about her or harmless, but just like him, like, oh, Meghan's dad working out for the wedding, or like reading a book about Britain, like things like that. Like he was getting paid to take these candid photos. And so basically their like publicist people end up finding out about it, and they're telling her like, hey, this story's about to come out. She calls her dad. She's like, did you do this? He's like, no. She's like, listen, if you did, like, we can get you out. It's gonna get crazy for you. You shouldn't be home. And the dad's just like, nah, whatever. And then after that, there's essentially kind of like radio silence from her dad. Like the things he's saying to her are weird. They're getting text messages that she's like, this isn't him. This isn't how he talks. This isn't what he calls me. But it seems like they never really got to the bottom of anything. Like she never got to talk to her dad, and he was like, okay, look, like this is what happened, or anything. Like her dad just kind of started doing his own thing after that, I guess. But it's just sad that her dad like did that, and of course the news twisted it into it being her not wanting the relationship with her dad when it was like the other way around. And also, throughout these episodes, I forget which one it was, but there's one where they discuss like the headlines, like, you know, oh, Princess Kate, you know, whatever. I don't know what their titles are. Are they princesses? But anyways, Kate, and you know, like the avocados and pregnancy. And for Kate, it's like she found a great like combat for nausea, and then it was like for Meghan, you know, her avocados are linked to sex trafficking or something. No, it was something environmental, but like, you know, like a negative line, off the shoulder dress. She breaks protocol. Kate looks elegant in her off the shoulder, you know, like just the same they were doing the same things, and it was completely different headlines. Harry even mentions essentially Prince Will being like, well, my girlfriend had to put up with that, so why can't yours, type of thing. And Harry's trying to be like, dude, like, because there's a difference here, like there's a race element like there's an element of it that is dangerous and not okay, and like, are you good? Mind you, like, what does the wife really have to put up with? Like, probably if anything negative came out about her, it was like clothing she wore, or like, oh look, it's them partying when they were young. Like, that's not, you know, those are things that just kind of fade away and go away. Whereas with Meghan, it was like constant attacks. Like, come on now, sir, come on. Episode 4 is the wedding and its aftermath. So it was really beautiful to hear that she had a wonderful experience with her wedding. She talks a lot about how great it was. They talk about how Harry's dad, Prince Charles, helped them pick the people for the gospel choir, helped them pick, I think, either the orchestra or the music the orchestra was going to play. He had a lot to do with the planning with them and really helped out. Meghan wound up asking him to walk her down the aisle, which he agreed to, which I think is beautiful. We talk a lot about how great the wedding was, you know, how all the people that were there, the music they chose to, like, you know, first dance and things like that. Just how like it was a completely different wedding experience, what you would expect it from the royalty of England. But everyone loved it. But then that's when we switch into the aftermath of the wedding, where rather than things getting better or fading away, things got worse. So this is where things start to switch. Essentially what the series is saying, and what I felt too, like I agree, is Meghan and Harry were becoming more popular with the people than like the Queen herself or like royalty. And that's an issue, right? Because you're switching things up. So I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily like Queen Elizabeth or Prince Charles that were like directly like choosing to do this or directly like not liking her or whatever. I think it was like the monarchy, right? Like this very old school way of being, traditions that they don't want to change. And so I think they played a huge hand in how Meghan was portrayed, what the tabloids were saying, how things were being perceived, like all of that. Now, where I do find fault in like Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles is that they sat back, you know, like it was just like, well, that's just the monarchy and we're part of it, so too bad, so sad, right? And it's like, dang, help a girl out, you know? But yeah, so those are my kind of thoughts, and I definitely agree with basically like the monarchy being like, they're becoming a little bit more popular than like our traditions, you know, and our classic people, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles. And so, you know, that became an issue. Basically, episode 4 seems like kind of the shift of where like things go from bad to worse. And so there's like so much more bad coming out. And so we move to episode 5, where basically Meghan and Harry have decided like, we have to do something about this. We have to get some sort of protection. And I think between these 2 episodes is where Meghan is like opening up more about, you know, the depression she was dealing with, the suicidal thoughts, like how she wanted to just not be in this world anymore. And so this is kind of where, again, they're both like, something's gotta give, like we have to try to change something. And so, you know, they're talking to them, trying to be like, we need help, like we need you guys to say something, we need something to happen here. Meghan writes a letter to her dad that basically gets leaked. And they're kind of just like, ooh, you know, like, so they go to, you know, the monarchy, whatever, and they're like, we have to do something about this. We have to sue, like we have to send a message. And they just don't. They decide not to. So Meghan and Harry get their own representation to like fight this, which I'm sure, you know, they did not like. And so with this happening, they realize like, okay, she's not being protected. So they decide the best thing to do is to take a step back from the monarchy. But they didn't like that either. So it basically turned into this setup. I personally feel like it was a setup of them making it look like Meghan and Harry were just like, we're done with this, peace out. So they try to make it seem like the queen was blindsided, and and we don't, allegedly, this is all allegedly, but it's kind of clear that like it was, there was manipulation happening behind the scenes, because they try to make it seem like they just like blindsided them with this information, and then rather than it just being like, they're taking a step back from engagements to kind of focus on their own personal lives, it was this like they're cutting off the monarch, the royalty, and they don't want anything to do with Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth's not going to get to watch their kid grow, and all of this like stuff of what they were doing. And so Harry basically is like, we need to have a meeting. This is getting out of hand, the things they're saying, and no one wants to call a meeting. So Meghan goes to leave because their son Archie was in Canada. I think that's where they were gonna like go in terms of like stepping back, like they were gonna live there, like away from the monarchy or whatever. So as soon as she goes back, they call the meeting. So they call a meeting. Obviously it goes how we'd all expect it to go. And as Harry's leaving after the meeting, he gets a call being told that there is a joint statement going out, because with all this news, media was also saying that Prince William bullied them out of like the castle, or out of the royal home, and so they call him, and they're basically like, there's a joint statement coming out from you and William, like saying how false this is. And he basically has this moment of realization of like, they are willing to lie to protect my brother, but they're not willing to speak the truth to protect me and my wife, which is so crazy to think about. Like, could you imagine your like family is just like, we don't care that this is happening to you, but look what's happening to your brother, we need to fix that. And you're like, what? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And yeah, so this is, Harry also speaks about how him and his brother had like promised each other they would never be what it was like, for their mom and what it has been. And kind of this shift of him realizing that his brother wasn't going to actually keep that promise. And his brother kind of was like following, tradition and the curve and what's always happened, and kind of doing that and leaving Harry to handle it. So yeah, so that's where, I think that's where the cutoff happens. I think that's where they're like, yep, this is done. This is done. We've had enough. We move on to episode 6, which is our somewhat of a happy ending. So they end up needing somewhere to go. Basically, the monarchy is not going to protect them, right? Well, they're in England. There's no, well, anywhere. There's no security, but especially in England, like they won't have the protection of the castle or whatever the heck you call it. And so they're like, okay, so we need to go back to America. We need to get our ducks in a row. And this is where Tyler Perry comes in. He's kind of talking about how it seems to me like it was just a calling. Because he talks about how like he didn't really know much about the royal family. He kind of knew, we all kind of have this glamorous view of royalty. And that's what we saw them as, like the royalty you watch in like movies and stuff. And then we also know like what happened to Princess Diana. But right, it's kind of just that like gossipy, the things you hear. So he's talking about how like, I didn't even know these people, like whatever. But it seemed like there was just an inclination for him to like help Meghan and Harry. So ended up staying with Tyler Perry in his LA home or whatever. It stays hidden for a while. Like they're kind of checking the news every day to see if it's out, and it's not out. But when it did get out, it was like people were like cutting his fences to get in. There were helicopters. Like there's footage of them just like filming, like, like Tyler Perry and them are just hanging out at the house. Like there's helicopters everywhere, like they had to get security, all that stuff. So then eventually they buy a home. Meghan, they're still dealing with the lawsuit as well. They're trying to say all these things. First, they're trying to say that her friends, because her friends write this article and people kind of trying to say like, this is who she is, like not what you're hearing. Within that article, there's like one small line about how she wrote a letter to her dad. And so they tried to say that like, that means that the letter could be exposed, because clearly if her friends mentioned the letter, it's okay to mention the letter. Like, you know, talking in circles. But she ends up winning, but of course they're appealing. They didn't care about winning. They just wanted to keep being able to print stories about her. She ends up suffering a miscarriage throughout this, just because it was like Harry said, he was like, obviously you can't prove it, but he's like, with everything going on and the timing of everything and where she was in the pregnancy, like, it's clear what the cause was. So then we have the Oprah interview, and I believe it was while she was pregnant with their daughter. Yeah, their daughter, Lily. And in the Oprah interview, her goal was to get the message out of, like, you know, the depression and the mental health issues she dealt with. But it seemed that from that, the focus shifted to the racism they experienced, because that's what she was talking about. Harry mentions, not in detail, but that certain things were said about what their son's skin color might be, and different things being said. And then, of course, all the things we saw in the tabloids of how they were, what type of racism they were experiencing. But anyways, all that to say that what was the interview, what was taken from it was the racism that is in the monarchy, basically. Because the thing is, they were well received by England, like by the people. It was the monarchy that you could tell wasn't in favor of Meghan. So they had the people. It was just the monarchy. And then here we get a little bit more of Harry talking about his mom and, like, thinking about how she had to deal with it alone. Because, you know, we have Harry basically didn't want history to repeat itself. So he did everything he had to do for his wife. You know, he decided to leave and kind of forge their own path, which I think is amazing. Like, the love to have for your wife to leave everything you've ever known is so intense. And I can't imagine how hard that was for him and for her to feel like, I'm taking him away from everything he's known and feeling like it's your fault. And, you know, that is hard. And so he mentions thinking about how his mom dealt with all of that alone. And honestly, like, that hit me too. Like, I was like, seriously, his mom, because Prince Charles wasn't protecting her, like, she was just her, just like by herself, you know? So it's so sad and scary to think. It's sad. It's just sad. All in all, the Oprah interview kind of just brings clarity and the view of how they were not protecting her. They didn't care to protect her because she was black. They didn't care, you know, like, the racism is there. And so they end up making a statement basically saying they had no idea what she was dealing with in terms of racism. Whoop-de-whoop-de-woo. A message that is not true. Because they talk about all of these instances where they're telling them this is happening. Look at what they're saying. Da-da-da-da. And it was just being ignored. So it's like, you did know. You just didn't do anything about it. And now you're trying to backtrack. And you can't. But yeah, so that's how episode 6 kind of just ends with that, like, reminiscent of, like, what has happened, where they are now. Prince Harry ends up going to, like, his grandfather's funeral, and it must be tough to, like, you know, and he misses it, and you can tell Meghan is sad that they're missing out on certain aspects too, you know, like, she talks about how she really enjoyed going to the holidays with them, and he talks about how great the holidays were too. Just talking about how big and everybody getting together and just having a good time and not worrying about everything, what it's like when they're living in public. But yeah, all in all, it's just clear that the monarchy wants to keep their traditions alive, and so that's why Meghan was put through what she was put through. That's why all those things came out about her the way they did. You cannot convince me that allegedly the monarchy didn't have a hand in all of that. And it is so sad to me that Prince William could just watch that happen. Like, you would think newer generations, and I think that's where Harry's mind was at, was like, how do you not see this? Like, how do you not see the issues? And whereas, you know, everyone else is kind of just like, we all had to deal with it. And it's like, you're not black. No, you didn't. You didn't have to deal with this. Stop. It's not the same. It's just not the same. And like Harry said, even if it was the same, don't you think it's about time we put a stop to it? Like, what's happening here? And he also says how he knew, like, if there were stories that they didn't want to come out, those stories were not coming out. They had the connections. They had, you know, the power. They had the ability to, like, trade things. And he's like, and they would not do that for her. But also he was like, you know, but we also wouldn't want to have lived that. Like, he wanted things to change, and the monarchy doesn't. And Prince William is all about keeping it the same with his Kate. It was cool because watching it, all the thoughts I've always had as, because, you know, when the Oprah interview came out, we heard a lot about everything going on, and we got more of like an inside view. And then, you know, stories that came out here and there about them and what was going on. And it kind of just confirmed my views and kind of made me feel like, yeah, like the things I thought made sense of, like, you know, them not liking her and all of this being created by them to paint a certain picture of her. Because, like, they were, like they said, it was like 20, they were like 25 to 30, like, stories you could compare of, like, both Kate and Meghan doing the same exact thing, and it being a beautiful thing when she does it, and it being a, you know, scandal or like just negative thing when Meghan does it, you know? So it is clear, is all I'm trying to say. It was clear. I hope you enjoyed chatting it up about M and H, Meg and Prince Has, Meghan and Harry. Like the video if you did. Comment down below. Share your thoughts. I don't know. Let's talk about it in the comments. I love to talk. I love to chat. Subscribe for more content like this, and I will catch you in the next one.